Cozy, come on in. Everybody's here, and we have begun. A couple of announcements. One is you probably already were familiar with, and the other one will probably make some of you relatively happy. Okay. So the first one, we're not going to be here on Friday. Uh, I may or may not. Everybody has such an odd schedule on Friday because we generally try to bolt out of places the day before Thanksgiving break. So, I mean, if I'm going to be online at a specific time, either 9 or 10, I will let people know if they want to log on and give them the log on information. If not, I'll just record it. That'll be undoubtedly where we do the spinal cord and the meningeal layers, which is an important talk. So, and then we come back, obviously, on Monday. I'm going to focus on the autonomic nervous system. The big question is I'm going to try to get everything done so that the following Monday, the Monday prior to exam week, it's a class day because we're making up for the class day we didn't do on Labor Day. Same for in the spring as well. We make up for MLK Day. I'm trying to make that like a review session here in class. That's my plan. So hopefully I'll get everything in. I don't have to scramble to get more stuff in. I was happy with about 2/3 of the performance on the exam. You saw the grades. I never know if I get close to successful. The wrong term is, I mean, happy is irrelevant because I saw improvement. I mean, there were a few folks still have significant problems, significant limitations. And I want to tell you, so I've got to do one last thing to try to get grades into a positive. Because I mean, a lot of you need to get, depending on where you are, health sciences is a C, nursing or pre-nursing or undecided for nursing is a B, which means B minus. As long as it's got a minus in front of it, it works. So, and it's a two-edged sword. I'm going to make the final open book. This is the reason it's a two-edged sword. An open book means everything. Oh, I mean, it's not just you bring the textbook; it's a digital textbook. You can bring everything, but a professor in anatomy and physiology to the class. So you can have your laptop, you can have your notes, you can have all your research. I don't care. That's the idea. The mistakes students make, because a lot of times they've been hard, and I'm not pointing any fingers, lax about their preparations. Oh, we made an open book. Yeah, who cares? I'll just get here and I'll chat GTP it. I'll Google it, slam dunk. I don't even have to study. There's a 2-hour time limit from when that schedule is. I'm all pencils down, everybody hands it in. That's the bottom line when you're doing something like this. If it's open book, the only way the constraint is time. So people who do not prepare and just start looking it up, and believe me, the way I phrase questions, it's not always clear from that. So they use that as an excuse not to prepare. I understand you have other problems, but if you need to get a B or an A to go forward, this is an opportunity. So for the late arrivals, listen to what I just said. Listen to the recording. It's an open book final exam. Open note, open book. Bring your computer. I don't give it up, but you must have some degree of preparation and organization, or believe me, it will not have a particularly better outcome. Because I've done this before, and the outcome has been predictable. Does everybody understand where I'm coming from? I can't do any more for you than this. If you can't get it now, don't ask. Okay? Having a moment. It's because I saw the Jurassic Park movie, I'm in a good mood. The bad guy got his head lopped off. Not that I shouldn't be celebrating that, should I? Probably not. Okay, moving on. So we're going to do I'm going to do this sort of laundry list style. I'm going to try to eliminate things that are, and we are doing the ventricles, I apologize. I'm starting here. So I'm trying to get through and we'll try to emphasize the areas that I know are test content and unemphasize or do not emphasize areas that are more informational. You should be able to tell what they are. Moving on, ventricles. Ventricles are the fluid-filled chambers. Remember, we started as a tube and fluid in the middle. The fluid is cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid comes from plasma. When we get to that, which is we're not going to see it today, it basically comes in through something called an arachnoid granulation. And what that is, it's where plasma is sort of, it's a different thing. But nevertheless, it basically it filters plasma, and this is typically in the ventricles. And what they do, they're covered in those ependymal cells we talked about to circulate it, and it sort of finalizes it. It's not all the same as plasma. It's different than plasma because of different constitution of electrolytes and various other things, and it's kind of finished off in by these locations that you will see. And effectively, what happens is it's circulated throughout those ventricles. It's just one hollow tube, but as it started as a tube, it expanded, it got thicker here, narrower here, all of these things until effectively it became these structures. And rather than go through the reading part of it, I'll talk about the important parts that are there. This is effectively what it looks like. These are the ventricles. Whoops. So this started as a hollow tube, and all this stuff was the solid material around it, the rim of the tube, so to speak, rather thick. These are called the lateral ventricles. They used to be first and second. That's why this one's called the third, and this one's called the fourth. So they are identical. This is looking at them from, as though you were looking at it directly. This is obviously from the side. These, they call them C-shaped. They're very large. They correspond to the major lobes: frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. And you can see it here. It's the basis when we start to look at things, when you look at MRIs and CT scans and all these different brain-related scan techniques. This is what they look like. Okay? We see these hollow chambers, and that tells us where we are in the brain. So it's if you're going to go into a field where this is involved. I mean, I've had a lot of students who will go into, and we used to, I think it's been incorporated in health science. They were sort of like, it's coming, I'll come up with the term, but they did a lot. They were the ones who were actively getting people ready and injecting them in scans, nuclear medicine. They were involved in, and I assume they still have maybe that major under another name or as part of health science. So all of that's very, very relevant because that's really how we identify those studies. So once the fluid is in there, it's all one big chamber. It's just like, again, it's a big chamber. It has a little passageway, fancy name called the interventricular foramen. This is the third ventricle. This surrounds the diencephalon. The lateral ventricles, they are all about the cerebral lobes, the basal nuclei. Then it has another little opening there called the aqueduct, basically a little narrowing that leads to this fourth ventricle, which doesn't do it justice here. This is between the cerebellum and the brainstem itself, and it carries all the way to the central canal, which goes all the way down the spinal cord. And indeed, the fluid is not just inside to make the brain buoyant, but it's outside as well. And when we look about the meningeal layers, the layers of protection of the brain, we're going to see that it's in something called the subarachnoid space. There's three layers we'll go over: pia, dura, and arachnoid. And in the space between the arachnoid and the pia is where cerebrospinal fluid. So the brain is buoyant because of it and protected. You've got fluid on the inside and fluid surrounding it. The fluid can escape and go to the outside down at the very bottom of the spinal cord, or by these openings called apertures. Aperture just means an opening. You have lateral ones, one on either side, and one sort of here. This is the median aperture. That's how it escapes to surround the central nervous system, principally in the brain area. Down here would be more of in the spinal cord. Really important. Backtracking quickly, There's, again, these are the ependymal cells or the lining cells. There's a fancy term, I'm going to make sure it's not on the test, called the septum pellucidum. That is a septum is a divider. It's like a thin membrane that's developed between the two. It's not essential, sometimes associated with some behavioral disorders in children if it's not intact. That's an aside. Okay, and then you have the third ventricle with the diencephalon, fourth ventricle, again, between so-called hindbrain, which means the brainstem and the cerebellum, and the openings that are there. The big player, the cerebral hemispheres. The cortex is the heaviest area. You went, look, it's 5/6 of the mass of the brain. Most of it is the cortex. That outer gray matter is comparatively very heavy. You did not know that. And I'm sure you went over a lot of these structures. Not a big deal. It's in the sheep brain, it's very hard to distinguish them. In the human brain, they're a little easier to see just because it's larger. The human brain, like this, has a lot more convolutions. They're very distinctive. And there's here, that's something called the central sulcus. I've never been able to identify it adequately with sheep brain dissections that I've done, hundreds. Okay, frontal lobe here, parietal lobe here, occipital lobe here, temporal lobe here. Basic nugget about each one of them, what they do. Frontal lobe, executive suite, language, thought, calculations, answering questions, basically makes us kind of what we are in a lot of ways. Parietal lobe, purely sensory of the body. Okay, occipital lobe, vision, temporal lobe, hearing. Broad brush. We process visual, we process auditory, general, what we would call general sensation, and then basically all that information is gathered and kind of sent forward for us to interpret, react, respond appropriately. Whether we need to respond, whether not. It's like, I know this would be a novel for this class, to decide whether to raise your hand and ask a question as to, other than, is that on the test or how do you spell it? I'm giving you all a hard time. It's near the end of the term. In the future, in other classes, you will need to be more interactive. Interactive is good. Okay. I promised my wife maybe 5 years. She insists they're going to be wheeling me in a wheelchair when I'm the same bad jokes. Don't do any of that. This is that central sulcus. So when you actually move something, this is called the precentral gyrus. That's actually where the command comes from. Everything else is determined. The post-central is all sensory. That's where you actually felt. When I smacked that down, it hurt my hand. So I felt that. It's there. And how do I interpret it? Then why did it hurt? Did I slam it down too hard? Am I dumb for doing that? All of that processing comes from you. I grab it. Oh, it's hot. What should I do? Should I grab it again and see if it cooled off? No. You probably should turn off the heat. Get a pot holder. Do something like that. That's processing. Here, we pre-process and execute the commands. Here, we receive the information. How do we react to it? We saw something. How do we react to it? And again, effectively, you heard something, and that's all shuttled, as you will see, by white matter to the anterior or frontal lobe. Don't worry about the insula. That's where smell. It's very primitive smell and taste. We respond very aggressively to the emotions. Smell is part of the limbic system. That's emotions. When you smell something you like or don't like, strong emotions. So that central sulcus, that's the name of them. You don't have to go into all those names. That's the one that specifically you do need to be familiar with. So the cortex makes its cortex, it's got gray on the outside. Highest order area, only two. Cerebral cortices, cerebellum. That's where we're doing the vast majority of our processing. Then white matter. And then typically when you get close to those ventricles, we have islands of gray matter. The basal nuclei are like that. But there's other areas, as you will see as we get farther down. When the spinal cord, it changes because we never have any exterior gray matter. And we don't have these islands of gray matter. You have central gray and white, and that's it when you get there. So here it is. This is, you can't describe it any more thoroughly than they have here. Everything comes from here. It makes us who we are. How well we can process the information, how well we can recall it, how well we understand it, our capacity of storage, which is effectively unlimited. All of those types of things come from there. And it's a relatively thin, that's not even a quarter of an inch, but extremely heavy, as you can see. This is not white matter. The gray matter there is the dendrite, the synapses, the cell bodies, the protective cells, blood vessels, but not the axons coated in white. And this is where we learned what they were. This is, when they talk about, this is some of that nuclear medicine. It's called a PET, or this is a functional MRI. They used an MRI with dye, basically, they gave the patient, and it causes the areas, typically because it impacts glucose, what your brain feeds on. So when you see something, this is the area you use the most. So with the increased color, that red, more reddish color it is, the more you think. When you hear something, it's temporal lobe, occipital. This is an interesting area for speaking. It's really in the motor cortex, but it's a very interesting area that I'm not going to ask you about. That's more for the advanced. It's called Broca's, Broca. And there's another area here for hearing called Wernicke's. Their proper names. They have a lot to do with how we hear and respond and our ability to form answers verbally or to communicate both verbally and non-verbally. These are particularly effective when we get to stroke. Stroke is where brain cells die. Typically it's motor. If someone has a stroke, we often see it manifested after they get over the initial phase. Eventually the nerves change, and all they can do, all the nerves going to your muscles, they only send out stimuli, excitatory stimuli, contract. Flexors are stronger than extensors. People walk around like this, full flexion. It's known as spastic because you're in spasm. Hemi, half the body, collision, meaning it affects palsy. That's really important. Flexors always overpower extensors, and so we have to brace people and rehab them in such a way that that's the starting point. If you don't do something and get their foot up to 90 degrees with the leg, they get a drop foot. Drag their foot every time they walk. Not easy to walk. You can't straighten out their wrist, their hand. It becomes useless. It's very, very difficult. And particularly hard to deal with, because you really have to focus on the side that's unaffected. Particularly hard if it's your dominant side, is what I was trying to say. But for instance, a stroke patient, their mind works. You can say, what day is it? But they can't get out the word Wednesday. It's so hard. It's extremely frustrating. That comes from this area. It's got a fancy name. It's called aphasia. Aphasia. On the other hand, sometimes it affects back here in sensory areas, a little less common. And they can speak perfectly well. They just can't understand the question. You'll go to them, oh, and how are you today? Yes, I know it's Wednesday. They'll give you a perfectly constructed answer that has no relationship. That's called a receptive aphasia. Just for context. I mean, that's more sophisticated, but I'm trying to give you an idea that we know a lot about certain areas of the brain and how they work, but certainly not all, and how it comes together. So we have motor, sensory, and association. It's all, for all intents and purposes, it's contralateral. Right hand's moving, left side of the brain's holding, left hand's moving, right side, except the cerebellum that we talked about on Friday before the exam on Monday, where it's ipsilateral, same side, motor coordination, really important. So whenever I went to grab this, it's not just me grabbing it with one It's all the coordination of all the muscle activities on that side. And so these are what I was telling you about. Some of these, pretty straightforward. This is, you see these illustrations a lot. Here's that central sulcus, red motor, blue. That's that little outline of those two areas whose names you don't have to know. And really what happened, and this is an important term, I told it to the others, when you're basically that movement like that, the cells that do that are pyramidal cells. The pyramids are two mounds that are on the medulla, the base of your brainstem. Interior has two mounds. The early anatomists called them pyramids. So these are pyramidal tracks. Those are your main tracks dictating your body to move something. How fast, how slow, whether start or stop. That whole Parkinson's discussion we had previously on Friday, that comes from other passageways dictating motor movement. We call them extrapyramidal. When somebody has Parkinson's or Huntington's disease, the shakes of some type, if they have a side effect to a medication, very, very common, particularly psychiatric and mental health related medications, neurological medications, they get these irregularities. Okay, you have the group name is called extrapyramidal. I'm not going to ask you that question. That's, you're going into a clinical field and your instructors in pharmacology, and they say, now you know what extrapyramidal symptoms are. You will impress them. You don't have to ask me. I'm giving. Oh, that person knows something. So you'll see that terminology a lot. The pyramids are the most significant motor tracks. Everything else sort of helps along. We've mapped this out. Okay, it's got a fancy name. It's called homunculus. It shows you how we interact with the world. How do we act upon the world? We act upon it speaking, upper extremity, of some lower extremity. They're mostly movement and postural, but these are all the specifics. Not a whole lot else. You can see the big areas. How do we receive information? Again, facial, what we swallow, what we eat, what we see, what we touch and feel with the contacts of our body, bottom of the feet. You can see very, very little. If you want, think about having a stomach ache. There's very little sensors. Next 10 people tell you I've got a stomach ache, ask them to point where it is. They'll point to 10 different places. Oh, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here, it's here. Because it's non-specific. That bug hit my face. Where? You'll know exactly where. Where'd you get a splinter in your hand? You'll know exactly. It's all a matter of the distribution of sensors that are there. And it's how we interact with the world. This is very significant. Again, the name is homunculus, red for motor, blue for sensory. Okay, again, we decide all the planning before we actually move it come from here. All of those types of things. And a lot of it we don't have to worry about. I know how I'm going to pick up and write with my pencil. Okay, we've got repetitious or pattern movements, all of that type of stuff. Here's that Broca's area. It's not as easy as they can't speak. If you hand them a pencil and paper, very often hard to do it that way. That's the frustration of stroke patients. And I'm skipping through things that we're not going to, that's more the anatomy portion of it. Here is stroke paralyzes muscles typically on the opposite side, almost exclusively. And again, the paralysis is very predictable. So, and they just go through some things that are there. And this is what a lot of times would happen. You have to retrain individuals who have had damage to their brain. It's not easy. That's part of rehab. A lot of people who are in health science, physical therapy is all about that. Physical and occupational therapy are all about retraining, reusing it. Occupational therapy is almost exclusively dedicated to the upper extremity because it's all about, you might remember me telling you, activities of daily living, getting dressed, eating your food, cutting it, picking up a fork, all that type of stuff. Going to the bathroom, taking a shower. A lot of different sensory areas we're not going to go into. The primary areas that are there, things that are important, those proprioceptors, those little sensors that tell you exactly where you are, what you're touching. I mean, closing my eyes, I know if I'm on the keyboard, if I'm on a marker. I almost just dropped that, right? Anybody can do that are there. All of those things. And then this is whether it's from your body or things like that. Another name that's important. I won't ask you. This is another one of those neat NCLEX style questions. Vision, calcarine sulcus. It's got a fancy name. They like names like that. So write that down someplace. Like I said, a notebook, or if you hear it, if you listen to this, right? Calcarine sulcus. I might see that down the road. Some people are in love with certain names. That's where you actually see something. And then everything else we associate. Like I know the people who are in this class. I'm beginning to know a half dozen names, 10 names out of 30 of you. I'm getting there. Lindsay. See, you didn't think I knew you. Don't smile. See, but they give us little pictures in, the roster, so I can associate a name and a face. Sometimes they don't look the same. Do you send them those pictures, or do they take them? Like, they take them for IDs, and is that where the picture comes from? Oh, they got to get another photographer. For my wife makes them take about 10 driver's license pictures. She's not happy if it's not. I take the first one. They can't make me pretty. Didn't have to laugh. I don't like any of you. So those are straightforward. Smell, primitive, memories. That's the beauty of the limbic system. I told the other, when we talked about the hippocampus being critical and part of Alzheimer's, and really one of the first areas that are affected. And your emotions are what allow you to remember things. Smells trigger it, instances trigger it, going by an area where you saw an auto accident and maybe there was an ambulance, maybe something worse was there. My son was telling me that where he lives in an apartment in Weirden, a townhouse there across the street. Some cause he looked out, saw an ambulance. Then he, went in and took a shower, got something to eat, came back out, and he sees the coroner's van. I mean, those are and they stick in your mind. Something tragic. It was elderly people. It wasn't something criminal that happened. But you understand what I mean? And when particularly if any of you are going into clinical fields, treating people, understand the thing that you remember the most, the easiest are ones that you've gotten wrong. That's why I make such a big deal out of getting it right the first time. You find if you're going into nursing, you'll do 15 things right and one thing wrong. They will jump all over you over the one wrong. You won't even get a pat on the back for the other 15. That's how they try to use that to cement it. I'm done. It's that I've been dealing with education for 25 years and seen it on the floor for 25 years before that. Doing this for a while. Hey, nothing here, nothing here, nothing here, nothing here. Okay, visual cortex blindness. Okay, these are interesting. They're too hard to explain. I'm not going to ask you about them. I will tell you the important anecdote about them that I tell everybody. These are areas that this is how we can broadly associate things. Mixing emotions, sensations, kind of make us what we are. Both anteriorly, frontal lobe, all the other lobes, posterior, in association with the limbic, which is our emotional system. It sort of surrounds all of this and is deep within inside the brain. This is the big player. The prefrontal cortex is surely the most complicated. It makes us who we are. My unusual personality comes from there. Maybe your distinctive personality comes from there. intellect, cognition, recall, working memory, judgment, all about, and how we see that. How do I tell if I said something I shouldn't have said? Somebody looks up to me, makes a funny face. It's like, oh boy. You almost immediately try, oh, that was a joke, try to correct it. Right? We all do that. Years ago, before they understood the complexity and the importance of this area, this is how they treated the criminally insane people. Not with medications, which there weren't that many of, to be fair, with electroshock therapy, which really we only use now for depression. But if they had a criminally insane person, all they did was it was called a prefrontal lobotomy. They took out this part of their brain. And they became effectively a walking zombie without any connotations that zombies have, all the movies and shows that are on, not the Walking Dead type of stuff. They basically are someone who okay, time to go to the bathroom, sit down, time to eat. They're no longer a person. If you have not seen the movie, you can find it, I'm sure, for free on any platform. From 1975, brilliant, multiple Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. At some juncture, watch that. That shows you what it was like, how they treated the criminally insane. Were you in nursing? That's where the term Nurse Ratched came from. It's evil nurse, portrayed brilliantly by the late Louise Fletcher, who was just a wonderful lady. She could be mean to the end in that show. It was absolutely brilliantly done. She won an Academy Award. Jack Nicholson won his first Academy Award for this as well. Brilliant. So there's a lot, and there's been a lot of movies that have been made over things like this. A lot. So they've gone from some good material that are there. And here's the limbic system again. Underscore the importance of the hippocampus for memory. And again, this is the idea of what they call lateralization. So basically between the two hemispheres, okay? I'm right-handed. I always look to see who's right-handed, who's left-handed. And again, it's about 90-10. I'll buy that. So typically there's a lot of overlap, okay? Left brain dominant, right-handed, right brain dominant, left-handed. But the problem is I'm this. I am the most left brain dominant person around. I have limited visual spatial skills. Okay. I don't pick up on intuition or emotion. My wife says, "Didn't you see that?" I go, "No." Yeah. And then I have zero artistic and musical skills. You see how neatly I write the diagrams. Don't laugh about that. But a lot of people have a blend. Okay, it's very interesting about all that. My wife has a lot of this, but she has very good artistic skills, very creative skills, those kinds of things. So I think we paint with a broad brush, but effectively that's the interesting part. So and sometimes you see people who just have a lot of those. I think it's limited on one and a lot on the other. I think you rarely see half and half. Moving on. So we have over here. I got through something. I did this sort of just highlight film style. The white matter, 3 types, basically. And I already talked about it a little. All that sensory stuff, we pre-process, refine, and send it forward on the same side to interpret in the frontal lobe. So those are association fibers. Horizontal, only on the same side. Commissural means the right and left hand know what they're doing at the same time. They send signals across. So even though we might be predominantly using the right hand, it's not like the other side of my brain is unaware of that going on. And then we constantly are sending signals up and down. They're called projection fibers. So association, horizontal, same side, commissural across, projection up and down. There's a couple of these. This is the one that comes from the thalamus and basically directs information to the appropriate area. What did I see this? Where should it go? I heard this. Editing it, sorting it, making sure it goes to the right place. with just the right emphasis. Oh, I heard that was important. That was a siren, that type of thing. So you can see it here. The red ones are all on the same side, their association. The bluer ones are up and down, and the green ones are across. The most important of these is this white matter called the corpus callosum. Hard body, literally what it means. That's the one that's the thickest of all of the white matter tracts that we see in the central nervous system, I believe. There are some commissurable fibers in the spinal cord. They don't really have names. And here you can see it a little bit better. Here's that white matter in the corpus callosum. Here you can see the association fibers. Just carry it forward, backward, okay, and then up and down projection fibers. This combination, maybe you saw it on the sheep. I usually have my students take at least one extra brain, and we sort of lift off the whole cerebral thing and get under into this area, and you can actually see this sort of like little scallop. You can see the fibers that make up this corona radiata, which means radiating crown. Corona means crown. Coronavirus, which we learned about in micro, have proteins that have a crown-like appearance with the electron microscope. That's where it gets its name. The basal nuclei, just the only one you have to know, we call them collectively the striped body or corpus striatum. And this is the one that's associated with the substantia nigra. It's got a fancy name, nigrostriatal dopamine pathway. That's the one that's associated with Parkinson's. So it's a path between the midbrain and the basal nuclei. There's another one from the midbrain called mesolimbic that's associated with addiction. Both involve dopamine. So we understand, it doesn't mean we can do anything about these pathways necessarily when they're damaged or there's irregularities, but at least we understand where the problem is, and that has given us some ways to treat certain problems. This is what they look like, not a big deal to know all the names, the putamen or the caudate nucleus. And again, it plays a role in more than just muscle movement. So there is, and that's why people with Parkinson's, they very often you'll see they're almost unemotional. We call it a flat affect, AFFECT. It's like, and you've talked to people like this, they really don't respond. They don't laugh when it's appropriate. It's almost irresponsive. And you'll see this with patients. All those different things that are there. Huntington's is like that as well. Huntington's, though, it doesn't have that. It's all motion. Very, very bad disease, fatal. Very limited treatments. It's a genetically inherited disease, interestingly enough. And it's been around forever. So it affects these basal nuclei. Years ago, they used to think in medieval times that afflictions were acts of God or you're invaded by the devil or some type of divine punishment. These people had irregular movement. Fancy name for movement disorders are chorea, not with a K, Chorea. So when you hear about choreiform movements, irregular movements, and this one had a great name, that's why I'm telling you the story. It's called St. Vitus's Dance. What do I tell you about St. Anthony's Fire? That's when people eating moldy rye bread. Moldy rye bread produces what are called ergot amines or ergot alkaloids in pharmacology. The most famous of these is lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. It's a hallucinogenic drug. Very popular in my college days, as far as I'm going. We went to spring break. You just put up a poster. We can go where you want. Very weird colleges. All right. Diencephalon. Thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus by definition are 3 parts. The thalamus, the largest by far, it's here. It's effectively sorts, mediates, relays all sensory information and shuttles it to the appropriate part of the brain. parietal, occipital, temporal lobe. Hypothalamus is the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The blood-brain barrier is the weakest. That's where you can sense glucose levels, sodium levels, other chemical levels that are there, and basically respond appropriately by telling our endocrine system, make more, make less. It's part of homeostasis. It's really important. A little tongue-like a portion of it sticks down. It's called the infundibulum. It makes up the posterior part of the pituitary. So the pituitary gland here is really attached to a tiny little outpouching of the central nervous system from the hypothalamus. And that's where basically how we respond chemically to things. Sometimes we respond neurologically, and then it'll trigger our endocrine system, and those chemical effects will last longer. So you're going to see a lot of that. And so here's the thalamus. Lots of named nuclei. Effectively, you don't have to know any of those. It is a rather substantial and important area that are there. Sorting, editing, and relaying, etc. All of the information where it's supposed to go. And again, we'll often see that, again, when we think about regulating emotion, it's like you sense something. That's another part where subtly, subconsciously, do I overreact or do I, how do I react to this? Very, very quickly. That type of thing. And a lot of times when people have like anger management disorders, that's where they can't filter that and say, okay, think about that before you react, that are there. So mediate sensation is a great word, plays a role when these signals like light, sound will arouse or awake, play a role in all of these things. The hypothalamus, there's that stalk, the infundibulum, that's the interplace. Oh, this is the blood-brain barrier is weaker there, and so that's where all the sensors are. What's dissolved in the bloodstream will impact, and there's so many examples you'll get when you get into more clinically based fields. So it controls, we're going to deal with when we come back, the autonomic nervous system, all of that stuff. Basically, it interacts so we have ways to control our blood pressure, ways to control our heart rate, etc., our digestive tract, physical responses. This is where it gets to be part of the emotional or limbic system. This is another area that's so important. So you imagine what damages are there. I mean, this may be an area where somebody has an inability, just can't experience pleasure. Plays a part in rage as well. You're going to see another part in there of the limbic system called the amygdala is really highlighted by rage. That's really folk with people with real anger management. We see problems there. And so all of the things you can read through that. See, yeah, endocrine. And again, plays a role in a lot of this. Not all of these are eating disorders that are brain related up there. I mean that they are in a higher level of consciousness, or we treat a lot of eating disorders as being OCD or partial acts of depression. Some of these are more physiologically associated with different areas of the brain. And in general, when we look for cause, I mean, a lot of times we can be dismissive and say, oh, it's an emotional or some type of mild depression or a depressive response. I mean, you always think about infection, trauma, tumor, reaction to different medications. All of those have to rule out first. And again, this is more about sort of your body's biological clock. That's the pineal gland. I don't want to race through this. I ended a little bit past this, but I will stop here just, rather than push and start to go through the midbrain. So I'll start with everybody with the midbrain on Friday when I do this remote. Thank you.